Today we're going to be talking about how to factor quadratics in order to solve them. So we've already solved this type of quadratic by graphing it on a xy axis and by finding the y-intercepts. The x-intercepts. So you'll recall that if it looked something like this, our solutions would be where it crosses the x-axis here and here. So we're also going to solve this kind of equation today, and we're going to do that by factoring. There's a property called the zero product property, and that says that if we have two things, say m and n, multiplied together to get 0, we know in order for that to be true, either m equals 0, n equals 0, or they both equal 0. So we are going to try to take an expression like this, ax squared plus bx plus c, and rewrite it so that it's only got two things that are being multiplied, so that we can use the zero product property and set each one equal to 0. Well, in order to do that, we're going to have to factor this, or put it into the, make it opposite of distribution, or FOIL. So let's go ahead and look at this equation. Now, in this class, we're going to learn how to factor with a certain method. This is called the X method, and we use it just to visualize our thinking. So in order to factor, or do the opposite of FOIL or distribute, we need to be able to pull out certain terms that things have in common. If you look at this expression, there are 3 terms. We want there to be 4 terms so that we can look at things 2 at a time. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to split up this middle term into 2. Now this is how we begin. We draw a large X, and on the top we're going to multiply A and C and put that number there, and on the bottom we're going to put B. And we're going to try to think of 2 terms to put in the sides that will multiply to AC and add to B. So this term and this term, these are going to be factors of AC that add to B. Okay? And we're going to put those in the sides. So here we go for our problem over here. We draw our large X, and A is 2, C is -4, so 2 times -4 is -8. And then we put B, -7, on the bottom of that X. Now, 2 numbers that will multiply to -8 and add to -7, let's try to think of those. Things that multiply to 8 are 2 and 4, but those don't work, and the only other ones are 1 and 8. So in this case, the answer would be -8 and +1. Those 2 numbers will multiply to give you -8, and they'll add to give you -7. So those are the 2 numbers we're going to use to replace the -7x with. So we're going to rewrite our expression, and we're going to replace the -7x with a -8x and a +1x. So now we have this split up into 4 terms. If we were to combine the -8x and the x, we would get right back up to our original equation, so that's good. And now we're going to look at this 2 at a time. So if we look at the first 2 terms, we want to think, what do they have in common? What could I divide out of both of them? And they both are divisible by 2 and by x. So we're going to pull out a 2x. So when we divide 2x squared by 2x, we get an x left, because we're dividing it out. We're doing the opposite of distribution, which distribution is multiplying. When we divide -8x by 2x, we're left with -4. Okay, so that is our factorization of these first 2 terms. We did the opposite of distribute. If we were to multiply 2x back into x minus 4, we would get 2x squared minus 8x. Alright, so our first 2 terms are factored. Let's factor the next 2 terms. So there really is nothing that x and -4 have in common that we could divide out besides 1. So we're just going to pull out a 1. And that will leave an x minus 4. Alright, so now we factored the second 2 terms, the first 2 terms. We're going to treat this blue expression like one term and this green expression as a second term, and we're going to factor what those two have in common. So you'll see that they both have an x minus 4. So we're going to factor that out. And what we have left is what we get when we divide each by x minus 4. When we divide the blue term by x minus 4, we're left with 2x. When we divide the green term by x minus 4, we're left with 1. So this is our factored version right here. Now that helps us because now instead of having a sum of 3 terms equal to 0, we have a product of 2 terms equal to 0. And we can use this zero product property, which says you can set each one of those terms equal to 0 to solve for the letter. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and set x minus 4 equal to 0 and solve, and 2x plus 1 equal to 0 and solve. When we solve the first term, we get x equals 4. And when we solve the second expression, we get x equals negative 1/2. So those are our two solutions. Now, if you were to graph this, that is where the parabola would be crossing the x-axis. It would be crossing at 4 and negative 1/2. Okay, let's go ahead and try factoring another problem. So let's say that we have 9x squared minus 1 and we want to factor this. Let's go ahead and draw our large X. We're going to put A times C on the top. Now A is 9 and C is negative 1. B is actually a 0x in there. We could rewrite this as 9x squared plus 0x minus 1. So 9 times negative 1 is negative 9, and 0, or B, will go on the bottom. So two numbers that multiply to negative 9 and add to 0 would be negative 3 and positive 3. So now let's go ahead and rewrite this 0x as negative 3x plus 3x. Okay, and we're now going to factor this 2 at a time. Now this already has an even number of terms, but it has nothing in common, so that's why we still want to factor it. So let's look at the first two terms. We can pull out a 3x, and we're left with 3x minus 1, because when you divide 3x by 3x you get 1. And when we look at those two terms, we don't have anything in common, so we'll just pull out a 1. Now we're treating this first term, or this whole 3x times 3x minus 1 as one term, this 1 times 3x minus 1 as a second term, and we're going to factor those as two terms. So they have a 3x minus 1 in common, and they have a 3x plus 1 left over. So this one doesn't say to solve, it just says to factor, so this is our factorization and that is our answer. Okay, let's say that you have a really big number, like negative 252. So let's go ahead and try this problem. So we draw our x. First term times the last term goes on the top. The first term is 1, because there's nothing written in front of the x, so we assume it's 1. And the last term is negative 252. So 1 times negative 252 is negative 252. And then on the bottom, we get the middle term, which is negative 9. And we want to think of negative 200, or two numbers that will multiply to negative 252 and add to negative 9. Now those are kind of hard to do unless you start listing all the factors of negative 252. Like 1 and 252, combinations won't add to 9. 1 and, what is that, 1 26, something like that. Well, that won't add to 9. So you could keep listing those. Another way to do that, though, is to use your calculator. So what you're going to do is you're going to hit the y equals button up at the top left-hand corner of your calculator, and you're going to type into your y1, y equals, and you're going to take your a times c, so your negative 252, and you're going to put that in, and you're going to divide it by x. Now this is telling the calculator, basically we're looking for factors or things that divide into negative 252. So next, you're going to hit your second button, followed by your graph button. Now this button should have the word table above it. When you do that, it'll take you to a table of values that are on your graph, and they include factors of negative 252. So there'll be an x column, a y column, and it'll have lots of numbers in there. One combination should be positive 12 and negative 21. So you're going to look for factors that, basically we know that these are factors of 252 because we told the calculator to find factors of 252. We just have to add the combinations together until we get negative 9. And you'll find that when you scroll down until you see 12 and negative 21. Those will add to negative 9. So those are the ones we're going to go ahead and use to factor. Now I'm not going to finish this problem, I just wanted to demonstrate how to find those two numbers if your a times c is large and you can't quite figure out how to find numbers that will add to b unless you start listing out, all the factors of that number. So using your calculator can be helpful in this case. If you do have trouble with your table, like it doesn't come up with, like the numbers are going up by 0.1 instead of just 1, or it's starting at a really low negative number or a really high positive number, you can change your table settings by going to second table set, which table set is above one of the top skinny buttons. It's somewhere between y equals and graph. I'm not sure which button it's above, but it should say something like TBLST for table set, something like that. And you can change how much the points are going up by. You can change the x, I think it's called x change, I'm not sure, by 1 to make them go up by 1, and then you can change the starting value of your table by just typing in what you want to start at, say 0. So hopefully that's helpful, and hopefully you're able to do your homework now.